Charles Koch thinks he has the solution to America's income inequality problem. And what a large problem it is. We have the most unequal distribution of wealth and income in this country since the 1920s, among the highest in the world. Right now, the wealthiest 400 Americans own more wealth than the entire bottom half of our country. And the 6 heirs to the great Walmart fortune own more wealth than the bottom 30% of Americans. The top 1% of Americans own 40% of our entire nation's wealth, while the bottom 60% of us own less than 2% of the nation's wealth, and the bottom 40% of all Americans own just 0.3% of the nation's wealth. Since 1979, after-tax income for the top 1% of Americans is up 281%, while it's only up 16% and 25% for the bottom fifth and middle fifth of Americans, respectively. And according to the Economic Policy Institute, CEO pay spiked 725% between 1978 and 2011, while worker pay rose just 5.7% during the same time. It's clear that income inequality is a major problem in America and that something needs to be done to fix it right now. That's where the Kochs come in. The conservative mogul Charles Koch, who is worth over $43 billion, says that eliminating the minimum wage is a solution to America's poverty woes. On Wednesday, the Charles Koch Foundation launched a $200,000 media blitz in Wichita, Kansas, Koch's home state. And in an interview with the Wichita Eagle about the campaign, Koch said that anything that people with limited capital can do to raise themselves up, the government keeps throwing obstacles in their way, and so we've got to clear those out. The minimum wage, or anything that reduces the mobility of labor. Reducing the mobility of labor, doing away with borders? There's no credible information or data that backs up Koch's claims that the minimum wage impedes economic growth and that doing away with it would solve any of our problems. In fact, the data says otherwise. A new study put out by the Chicago Federal Reserve, economists Daniel Aronson and Eric French show that raising the federal minimum wage by $1.75 to $9 an hour, what the president has called for, would increase the level of real gross domestic product, GDP, by up to 0.3 percentage points in the near term and would increase household spending by around $48 billion next year. And everybody knows that economies are driven by demand, also known as consumer spending. The fact is that doing away with the minimum wage will do absolutely nothing to reduce the extraordinary levels of poverty and income inequality in this country. So what will? First, contrary to what Republicans in Washington love to argue, we need to strengthen and expand our social safety net programs, not do away with them. Americans who are living on the edge need some bootstraps to pull themselves up by. Programs like Medicaid and food stamps are essential because they provide those bootstraps and help them get back on their feet. Next, we must invest more in education so young people can succeed when they enter the workplace. Right now, the United States ranks 17th in the world among developed countries when it comes to overall education and 25th in math and science. That sucks. We also need to take on the loopholes that make our tax system favor the rich, and we need to roll back the Reagan tax cuts. America's wealthiest citizens should pay their fair share and do their part to support the American economy, rather than just living off the backs of the working class. We also need to take an axe to all the corporate loopholes in our tax code, put there by lobbyists and corporate shills in Congress. To make this work, our nation's trade policies also have to change. No more so-called free trade deals like NAFTA, CAFTA, SHAFTA, and the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Giant transnational corporations should not have the right or the power to move our jobs overseas, and it's insane that our tax code is encouraging them to do so. Finally, any company whose business model depends on screwing their workers with pay that is so low that those workers qualify for food stamps and Medicaid should be put out of business. If we just set the minimum wage to what it was in 1968, which would be $10.25 in today's dollars, we begin the process of rebuilding our middle class. As part of the Koch Foundation's new campaign, they released a video about economic freedom in America. Take a look.
Are you in the 1%? Well, if you earn over $34,000 a year, you are one of the wealthiest 1%. in the world. That.
Wow. If you make $34,000 a year, you're in the top 1% globally. And anybody who only makes 10 or 15,000, you're in the top like 20, 30% globally. So you should probably compete with all those people around the world who are making $1 a day. Charles Koch thinks that this should make us all feel good and help us to sleep better at night, I guess. He thinks we should be content with the fact that right now the poorest Americans who struggle to survive and provide for their families each day are still better off than people in third world countries like Bangladesh. The fact of the matter is, Charles Koch inherited much of his money from his daddy, Fred. He's never known what it's like to run a household budget on the minimum wage. Taking wage policy advice from Charles Koch is like taking advice on how to run a neighborhood watch program from George Zimmerman. When it comes to the Koch brothers lecturing us about how the working poor should be paid, we should all just take Nancy Reagan's advice and just say no.